If I asked you if you have a definition of what love is, what would you say? Most people don't know. It's been a mystery that people have explored for thousands and thousands of years. My next guest is an expert on this topic and has explored love in all of its varieties. Anna Machin, coming up next on Beyond Belief. Hello, Dr. Machin. It is so great to have you on Beyond Belief. I've been looking forward to discussing really one of my favorite topics, and this is a one for the ages. If you consider the volume of poetry and music and lyrics and energy that has gone into the topic of love, on which you are an expert for the last, umpteen thousands of years. I think it would be fair to say that this is one of the most critical aspects of life for the majority of people. I think also it's one of the most mysterious, personally. And I'd like to start off with one of those questions that is, and I know you wrote an entire book on this, and so it's a little bit of a general question, but let's just see how you take it. It's one of those big questions that can have a long answer or a short answer, depending on how we go. But like Cole Porter asked in the song, what is this thing called love? What basically is love?
Wow. Yeah, that's the big one, isn't it? That's actually what my job is for the last 15 years of my life, has been trying to answer that question. And we can narrow it down to two areas that feed into human love, and that's, we call one a biological dimension. So there's a biological underpinning to human love, and then there's a sociological dimension, so what our culture and society bring to love. But I think the big thing to recognize is, what is love is a really, really complex question, because there are so many different things that feed into our experience of love. Even, all the different types of love we experience, for a start. So which sort of love are we talking about? And which level of explanation do you want me to answer that question? So it's a complicated answer. We're getting closer to understanding more and more of the answer. I will say, though, that we will never understand the full answer, because what's wonderful about love, and why I like studying humans actually, is there is an element of love which is highly subjective, and that is down to you and who you are and your experience. And we will never fully be able to tap that. And actually, that's why I enjoy studying humans and I enjoy studying love, because that bit of mystery, which in a way has generated all that poetry and all that art and all those questions, is what makes love special to a certain extent.
Totally hear that. And the biological aspect of it is fascinating, because on the one hand, it seems like it's got to be true to some extent that there is some kind of chemical basis to it. I'm not sure that it's the full basis of it. And, it's been suggested many times, that there is some kind of advantage to loving for the species, for the continuation of the species. And there was a book I read a number of years ago by a philosopher named David Stove from Australia, and he wrote it's a provocative title called Darwinian Fairy Tales. And in it, he outlines what I would describe as his objection to this kind of thinking. And I sort of summarized it. Normally, I would just sort of like speak it out, but let me read something to you quickly, and let me just see how you react to it. So I actually wrote this, but it says, there are those who suggest that it's a chemical illusion created by the brain and designed, in quotes, by evolution to promote the survival of our species. If so, I would say that evolution did a pretty lousy job. If anything, love is a great hindrance to us. It causes us to make crazy and rash decisions, for instance, like Romeo and Juliet, to have less offspring so that we can pay more attention to each one, and to lay down our lives often for the weaker, less viable portions of the population. And one more sentence, other life forms do perfectly fine in reproducing in a loveless manner. Salmon do not carry a torch for the one that got away, and mosquitoes do not endlessly pine for their departed forebears, as there's nothing productive in that. So this is something that's bothered me. I wonder if we would have done better as a species if we had just left love out of the picture, lust seems to be helpful, but like, doesn't it seem to you sometimes that love is like so complicated? It throws such a monkey wrench into human relations and is sometimes so painful and undesirable. There's a lot of songs about that also, by the way. Like, so how do we understand all that, given the fact that yes, oxytocin is real and serotonin is real and they have all these effects when we feel love? At the same time, it seems to like ruin things for people.
Yeah.
How do we understand that?
Okay, how we understand it is, yes, love is caused by evolution. Love has evolved to ensure the survival of the species. And what I'm going to pick up on in those sentences, and also what the quotes you mentioned, is this question of sometimes. So sometimes love is painful and sometimes love is difficult. And I think what we have to understand is not all adaptations, well, no adaptation actually is 100% positive. And the painful bits of love are in a way that the price you pay for love. So that's what we say about grief. Grief is not survival positive at all. It's actually detrimental to your survival. But you experience grief because you've experienced love. And the difference between us and the salmon is that we have relationships for an incredibly long period of time. The salmon doesn't. The salmon has sexual intercourse, produces lots of eggs. That's it. There's no ongoing relationship. We have had to generate love because our relationships are much more long lasting than that. So even the infant parent bond, the infant mother bond, which is the first love to evolve, because we have such dependent offspring, because we have such enormous brains and we take ages to develop, things like oxytocin is not powerful enough to underpin human relationships in the long term. So we have had to generate something that makes sure we stick around in the long term. And in reproductive relationships, romantic relationships, if we want to call them that, lust is not enough, because we need the parents to invest in that offspring for years to enable it to survive, and for those genes, if we're looking at the evolutionary point of view, to go down the ages. So I'm afraid his comparator of a salmon is completely inappropriate, because we can't compare ourselves to a salmon. We are a much more complex species. You know, you would be better to compare us to, for example, an elephant. Now, elephants experience love, and cetaceans such as dolphins and whales experience love, and they are a much better comparator to us than a salmon. So love is dreamt up, if you want to put it like that, by evolution, and it's there to make sure we start and then maintain our survival critical relationships, because cooperating with people for an incredibly long period of time is really, really hard. Some relationships are very, very hard, even within the family, even with your children, even with your lover. They're difficult. And therefore, I'm afraid we do need a little bit of help to enable us to do that. And that's what love is. And it is underpinned at the basic level by neurochemistry. But love is so much more than that. And that's why I wanted to write the book, because previous books have tried to narrow it down to one thing. So love is neurochemistry, or love is psychology, or love is, a philosophical point of view. It's all of those things and many, many other things as well. And so human love is really complicated. And therefore, I think trying to whittle it down and say it's not evolution, it is evolution, we're not taking account of the difficult relationships, we're not taking about how much of it hurts, absolutely. In the book, I actually do take account of that. But in the majority of cases, love is important. And we know that even now from the scientific data that shows the biggest impact that you will have in your mental and physical good health, in your longevity, in your life satisfaction, is the relationships you build with other people, much more than maintaining a healthy weight, quitting smoking, all these sorts of things we're told to do, which are important, but actually have good relationships. Because if you have good relationships and you get that cooperation and you get that underpinning of that lovely neurochemistry and all the other health benefits that come with being with somebody, then it's positive and it's all good. But no adaptation is all good. There's always a downside.
This is just as a follow-on, would you say that the institution, of the effectiveness of our different kinds of love has suffered in recent years? Has it gotten more challenging, more difficult? Is it a way of explaining the increase in anxiety and depression over the last 10, 15 years? Are people loving less in your experience?
I don't think people are loving less, and I don't think they're craving love any less. I think they're just finding it harder to do. And I will say, and it sounds like a sort of just a really easy answer in an extent, but I'm afraid the way we run our modern relationships has had an effect on that. And the way we try to run our modern relationships through social media and in a very efficient way. and in the way that maybe some of the dating apps kind of promote this idea of fast turnover, or not investing, or not sticking around, or not trying a little bit harder. And I think all those messages have affected how we think of love, actually. So I don't think people want love. I mean, certainly not the people I talk to, the people in my studies, but also the people I spend a lot of time talking to in the public sphere. They don't want love any less, but maybe we've made it harder. Maybe they've been sold stories and techniques of finding and keeping love that actually do not fit who we are. We are a person, we are an animal like any other animal, that when we build our relationships and when we try and maintain them, we have to do it in person. We evolved to do it in person. These screens, these ideas are very, very new, and our brains did not evolve to do that. Our physiology did not evolve to do that. So I think we've maybe, got a little bit confused by how we should do this. But no, I think nothing has changed in the way people crave love. Definitely
not. But perhaps in the way that they're receiving it,
the way they're receiving it, the way they're trying to find it, the way they're trying to maintain it, all of these things. And I think that's also why I wanted to write the book. I wanted people to really, really understand what human love is, and really understand what happens to you when you're in love, when you're out of love, when love is good, when love is bad. Because I think only by understanding what happens to you when you're in love, do you understand why it's important to do it to a certain extent the old-fashioned way, which is be in the room with somebody and be with people and hug the people you love and all that kind of thing, because that's how we've evolved to do it. And evolution is, I'm afraid, painfully slow. And it doesn't, in the last 10, 12 years of revolution of social media, that's nothing. That's not impacted anything at all, apart from, unfortunately, possibly our mental health.
Right. Seemingly so. But okay, so let's pivot in a slightly different direction. Did you happen to see the film Interstellar, which came out a few years ago?
Do you want to tell me what that's about?
We're gonna do, this is the first time we're ever doing this. We're gonna actually play a live clip.
Oh, wow.
Having to do specifically with love, and hopefully it'll take us one dimension deeper into this question.
Love isn't something we invented. It's observable, powerful. It has to mean something.
Love has meaning, yes. Social utility, social bonding, child rearing.
We love people who have died. Where's the social utility in that?
None.
Maybe it means something more, something we can't yet understand. Maybe it's some evidence, some artifact of a higher dimension that we can't consciously perceive. I'm drawn across the universe to someone I haven't seen in a decade, who I know is probably dead. Love is the one thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space.
I love that scene. It struck me that the second I saw it, and I think it's a fascinating description. She's describing love as some kind of, as she puts it, an artifact from a higher dimension. Now that's very, very different, I understand, and this is a philosophical program, than some of the biological bases of understanding it. But I'm wondering if any of that resonates with you. And as you said, since love is a multifaceted thing, is there any aspect of it for you that it has transcendent meaning?
Oh, completely. And that really struck a chord with me. And I would say I'm more on her side of that description than his, to be honest. I think that's why we have these two dimensions that we study. And I think I look at it like, because I'm an anthropologist, I'm not a scientist by training. I think I look at it in a different way to other scientists, in the fact that there isn't just a scientific explanation for love. That's part of the jigsaw. It certainly is. But there's this amazing subjective, philosophical, artistic, sociological explanation for love. And she's right. Love is something which is immensely powerful and makes you do the most amazing things. And as she said, can last for decades without you even being present with the person that you love.
Yes.
And that we can love. I mean, what I find absolutely fascinating, I think maybe one of the favorite chapters I wrote in the book was about religious love.
Yes.
Because what I think is astonishing is, as far as I know, we are the only animal that has religious love. And that's a love where we can love without actually having the person or being we love manifesting in physical form in front of us. So most angles, you have to touch the person you love. You have to hold the person you love, smell them, all these sorts of things. We are capable of loving something that, doesn't manifest, that we can't touch, that we can't smell. And I think that is astonishing. And it's astonishing even as a scientist, because you think, wow, what does that say about the human brain that you can do that? But also, what does that mean love is? And so I think, and maybe that's because I come at it as an anthropologist, I'm fascinated by our species. And I will look to any explanation or any understanding of that species. So it doesn't have to be a scientific explanation. And yeah, I think she's completely right. I am in wonder. And that's what I wrote in the introduction to the book. People say to me, oh, doesn't studying love take away its magic and make it, seem terribly black and white? And actually, no, the more I study love and the more I talk to people who are in love or have lost love or whatever it might be, the more I am in awe of what it is, because it is so complicated. And there are so many aspects of it which we don't understand, but also we're all experts in love because we've all had that experience of love, whether it be with a god or with your friend or with your family or whoever it might be you love. We've all experienced that. And I think that's what makes it so incredible and awe-inspiring, actually, is it's very complicated when you start looking at it. And you have to bring all of those aspects in, the philosophical, the sociological, the historical, the religious, whatever it might be, as well as the neuroscience and all that kind of stuff that we do. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise you don't understand it. You can't understand it, I don't think.
Do you feel, now that you've spent many years looking into this, do you feel you have a handle on it? You've looked at it from all these different lenses, and I'm sure that each one gives a piece. And that's the sense I got from the book. You're going, each chapter is a different angle on the question, and it's sort of like you take them all together, and you have sort of you have a sense of something, like, as you said, it's like we all sort of are expert on because we know it. But I find it's like people, if you ask your average person for a definition of love, they don't have one, and they say it as it's an emotion. It's oftentimes you feel like this when you have the emotion, but not 100% of the time. And then for me, exactly as you're hitting on this religious love, the transcendent kind of love, is wild and fascinating, and for me is the most significant aspect of it. Although love between humans also strikes me as being inexplicable on many levels. The intensity, the lack of being able to describe it in and of itself is indicative of something. All the poets who have struggled, all the musicians, everybody, we all seem like we're collectively striving to understand something that is beyond us. That's the best way that I could put it. And I appreciate very much that your openness to saying that it is perhaps part of it is beyond us. So in the chapter that you spoke directly about love of God, I want to read you something that you wrote, and with great respect, to try to tweak it a little bit, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. You write that whereas the relationship between Christian followers of God is highly personal and possible without intermediaries, Jewish and Islamic theologians argue that the relationship with God in Judaism and Islam is achieved through intermediaries, such as the rabbi or imam. I think that that's not correct.
Okay. No, I'd be really interested, because I spoke to various rabbis for the book, and I was hoping initially to talk about the relationships with God, both in the Jewish faith and in Islam. Yeah. And when I spoke to, but these, I'm aware, I'm not a theologian, and I'm not Jewish. I'm from a Christian background. And so the general steers I got from those rabbis was that, but it might have been those are the rabbis who were willing to speak to me.
Okay.
And others would have said something else. And the other thing I would say about Islamic the Islamic religion was, unfortunately, I found it very hard to find any imams who would speak to me, and that's fine. That's fine. Whatever reason, they were uncomfortable, and that's fine. So it was about trying to find people who would talk to me. But I'd be really interested to understand what you think the Jewish relationship is with God.
So it's interesting that one of the translations of the word Israel it's a Hebrew word yashar el, which literally means straight to God. Almost, saying right up front, like this is a group of people that does not want any intermediary. There's many references about the need for a direct connection. I will say that according to the Talmud, one of the famous rabbis there, whose name is Akiva, says that the Song of Songs is the most significant book in all the Hebrew scriptures, and if you read it, it's like it's just simply a love song between God and people, right? And it's passionate. The imagery that's used there, it sounds very much like a romantic kind of relationship, and you could ask yourself, well, how is that possible? Like, how are you expected? And by the way, it is one of the commandments to love God. Well, how? How do you love something, as you said, that has no form, that you can't talk to directly, and yet it's this commanded activity. It's an interesting facet of the religion, and I assume that Islam is probably like this also, as they're very steadfast in like. There's this one God, you speak straight to it, and at least I can speak well to Jewish practice, obviously, but in Jewish practice, the rabbi, helps with understanding issues of law, is good with pastoral counseling, sometimes leads services, but not necessarily. But in terms of an intermediary, it doesn't work like that. And so the exciting thing is that you do have the opportunity to try to go straight for the brass ring, and the challenge is that you also have to do that, and that's not so easy.
Well, I suppose what's interesting to me is, and you can tell me, in Christian theology, obviously there are the scriptures and the 10 commandments and the hymns that are sung and all that kind of thing, many of which refer to love of God. But there's also that aspect of personal prayer, which isn't about reading the words written by somebody else, but they're about your words to God. Is that because when I spoke to this particular rabbi, he was like, no, we don't really do that. We don't really just have personal chats with God, which obviously personal prayer is a major part of Christian religion. Is that something that occurs within Judaism, that people will have just a personal prayer?
Definitely. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
There's actually there's a space that's built into even the formalized prayer structure for personal interaction, and it's encouraged that at any time that a person has an issue, or I feel like, actually somebody just asked me this last week, somebody said, I don't want to bother God. I'm sure he's very busy, with my parking issues and my taxation issues, and truthfully the answer is no, it's completely fine. He's capacious enough to handle all of that and more, and so therefore, go ahead and bother with whatever's on your mind. That's considered perfectly good. So just in that vein, it just struck me that it's probably beneficial to know that we also go straight for the real deal as much as possible, and to know that core love is a critical element of the practice. To love God, as it's written in the Torah. You must love Him. And if you don't, you have to figure out how.
Yeah.
Okay, so all that goes back to the concept of this transcendent love, and knowing that the people that you've interviewed, the people that you've interacted with, what can you tell us about how they go about building this connection and feeling this love, and how does it differ from other kinds?
It's really interesting because I spoke mainly, I didn't really speak to congregations. I spoke mainly to people who have made love of God, made following religion their life. So I spoke to, in the Christian church, mainly nuns. And I spoke to a few priests, but mainly nuns. And what was really interesting, because what the science of religious love is quite young. And so really it's about, at this stage, that there have been some studies done which have been fascinating, looking at what happens in the human brain when you have a mystical experience, you commune with God. And that's some wonderful studies been done on in particular Carmelite nuns looking at that. And what we see from the science point of view, if I touch on that first, is we see the areas of the brain which light up, which is the fingerprint of human love. So we see that. What's really interesting, though, bearing in mind that you cannot touch, you cannot see, you cannot smell, you cannot be with this person in the physical sense, is that the areas of the brain that light up when you interact with a fellow human light up. So some people say, oh, well, you're not recognizing God as a person, as someone who you're in this interpersonal relationship with. Well, that's not what your brain thinks. Your brain very much thinks this is a person I love and I'm in love with them. And so that's what's really interesting. In terms of whether it's a different sort of love, I think it's only different from other sorts of platonic love, maybe in the sense that it is at this physical distance. Because when we talk to nuns in particular about the relationship they have with God, they will talk about all the things we talk about when we talk about relationships with our family and with our friends, and even, as you said, with a romantic partner. So God is father, God is brother, God is lover. God is this person, and they do all the same things about. So one of the bases of human love is the concept of attachment. It's a deep psychological bond that you build to somebody else, and it's very, very critical to your psychological well-being in particular. And we see, you build an attachment to God. God is your secure base. God is the person who gives you confidence to go out into the world and be who you are. And that's a sign of human love. We see that you have to maintain your relationship with God. You have to maintain human relationships. They're really hard. You have to spend your time with God. And in fact, nuns even have this period in the day, every day, where they check in and they think, how have I been with God today? Have I served God? Have I had that reciprocal relationship? Have I listened to God enough? And actually questioning, have I maintained this relationship well? And we know from the studies looking at mental and physical health that people in congregations, not just going to church where people, or, to synagogue and people go, well, that's the community love, that's because you're with the community. No, if you take part in personal prayer, then your mental health is better. So if you have this personal relationship with God, your mental health is better. So love of God, love of whoever it might be in a spiritual sense, seems to have the hallmarks of everything you get from a normal human love relationship. And that, I think, is both fascinating and wondrous, and I think does set us apart, as far as we know, from the other animals who I don't think have that ability to do that.
Would you say that presumably, like love between humans, which can become dysfunctional, is there a dysfunctional religious love as well, where it's not working for whatever reason, it's become unhealthy?
It's not something I've studied specifically, but I will say, when talking to the nuns, particularly the nuns who had been in orders for decades. So the youngest nun I spoke to, I think, was 32. The oldest nun I spoke to was 88. And she had been in the convent since she was 16. So and she certainly talks about the struggles sometimes to love God, and the questions that she's had about her relationship with God and who God is, and both whether she's good enough to love God, but also questioning that love when maybe things have happened when she thinks, well, how could you let that happen? And all those sorts of questions. So I think you struggle with that relationship in the same way you would struggle with a human relationship. It's not, I'm not a devout Christian, so I can't speak to it, but I think it's exactly the same as any human relationship, where there are ups and downs. And sometimes it's really hard. And I'm sure sometimes it is dysfunctional, but it's not something that I've personally spoken to people about. Okay,
fair enough. A couple of days ago, I took one of my kids and a friend to see a funny movie, Sonic 2. It's about this hedgehog.
Okay.
And there was a part of it where there was a wedding ceremony. And as it turns out, the groom was a secret agent who had, created this perception of love with this woman. And of course, she was head over heels, and believed that she was having this beautiful relationship. And this is all done kind of tongue in cheek, and then it works out at the end. But have you studied, or do you have any ideas about false love? In other words, when someone in there, and you know, what teen hasn't gone through this? They really believed that they had something, or not even teens, anyone could go through this. And on their side, it's 100% genuine, but unbeknownst to them, their significant other is not feeling it, you know, is making plans to back out, and, you know, and eventually that happens, and there's this devastation. Was that person actually in love? Was there love between these people? What does it mean about what love is when you have scenarios like that?
It's really tricky, and it's an area that we're kind of looking at, and I'll explain in the context we're looking at it in a minute. But you can certainly love someone and it not be reciprocated, yes. And then you question, well, is there love between them because something's not coming the other way? So you can certainly do that, I think, and you can certainly have, though I would say it doesn't have all the elements necessarily of long-term love. Because one of the deep or very, very close love. So very, very close love has a concept related to it called biobehavioral synchrony. And what happens in biobehavioral synchrony when people are very closely in love is you see that they mirror each other's body movements, which is probably something people have seen. You see it with children and their parents, and you see it with romantic partners. But then when you look in the body, the physiological systems come into synchrony. So like heart rates come together, and blood pressure and body temperature. And then when you look in the brain, you see brain activation and synchrony, which is a fascinating thing to see. And you see all the neurochemistry coming together. And that's biobehavioral synchrony. And I'm not sure you can get that if only one of you loves. So that's an interesting thing to look at. But the other thing I would say about it is one of the places where we're exploring love going forward is the idea of parasocial love. So you mentioned teenagers, and we always have this thing that teenagers have crushes. They fall in love with pop stars or film stars or even somebody, you know, I don't know, in a book. And they genuinely believe they're in love with that person. And that's developmentally actually a really important stage. It allows teenagers to explore love without maybe some of the more negative sides to it. So it's really important. But that's known as parasocial love. And we're really interested to know whether or not parasocial love, which is one-sided, actually has the same benefits as reciprocal love, actually appears the same on the scanner screen. So do we see the same activity in the brain as we would with reciprocal love? And actually, I'm afraid we don't know yet whether it has to be reciprocated for you truly to say, this is deep love and I'm getting all the benefits of love. And
okay.
We don't know the answer to that yet, I'm afraid.
Okay, that's okay. I'm sure you're going to come up with it. Like every other family in America, we got a dog. And I read recently, you know, that the hallmarks of canine love towards human may be a little overblown, and one thing that it says, you know, when the dog licks your face and and the kids are all happy about it, and you know, it's interested in the food that you've eaten recently, you know, when it licks your hand, it's not because it cares about you, it's because you have stuff on your hand that it's interested in, you know, and there is a chapter in your book about, you know, about animals, and does it? I mean, maybe a whale does, and maybe an elephant does actually experience love, and I'd be interested in knowing how we know that without them telling us. But does a dog love? Is there love between animals and humans that's real?
Yeah. Do you know something? Just before I answer that question, I'm actually going to remove something from my dog because he's chewing something really loudly.
Oh, no problem.
That was excellent timing. It's like he knew we were about to talk about him. So I have a dog behind me. Yeah. So I think, again, when we have this tendency as humans to look for a black and white answer to something, dogs definitely love us. Some of their behaviors, which we would interpret as love, probably aren't. So yes, licking the face is what puppies do to their mothers to get regurgitated food. Licking your hands is probably yes, because you have the remains of your peanut butter sandwich on your hand, and therefore that's lovely. However, the fact that they want to be proximate to you, the fact that they experience separation distress maybe when you're not there, the fact that quite often they seem to understand your emotional state, all of that is love. They are very good at reading. They're very empathetic animals. They're very good at reading humans, and that might be because we've co-evolved for like 30,000 years. So
right,
you know, we've been together for a long time. But certainly, if you look at So they have attachments to us. That's what that proximity bit is. There's this wonderful study looking at wolves and looking at dogs. And these are wolves who have lived with humans. So they're not afraid of humans, but the person sits in a chair and they draw a circle around them. And what the difference between dogs and wolves in terms of attachment and maintaining proximity is the dog will come and lie next to you in the circle. The wolf will just wander off and go and do something else. The dog wants to maintain proximity to you. That's an absolute sign of attachment, which is the basis of love. But also we know it because we've seen it on a scanner screen. So a marvelous scientist from Emory University in the States actually has done this study where he's trained dogs to lie in fMRI scanners, which is amazing because most humans aren't very good at it. And he's actually got them to interact with their owners, and he's got them to respond to a food reward. And we always talk about, oh, dogs are just with us for the food. If we didn't give them the food, they'd go. Actually, what we see on the scanner screen is, while they get a lovely dopamine hit from being given a hot dog, they think that's great. Actually, when they interact with their owner, even if it's just their owner saying, good boy or good girl, the screen lights up with the fingerprint of love. So they do love you, but it's, some of the behaviors are not going to be love behaviors. And we think that maybe they've developed this loving relationship because they rely on us so much. It's different to a cat. A cat can be very independent. A cat doesn't need you, for example, to go hunting with it. It will do that on its own. A dog does. Dogs have co-evolved to be led by humans on hunts, for example. They're not really particularly self-sufficient. Even stray dogs, if we look at sort of city dogs, town dogs, which are a phenomenon in many countries, they're usually fed scraps by humans. They don't go and hunt their own food. So there is something going on, particularly with dogs and with other animals. And again, this shows how amazing human love is, because we have an interspecies love. We have a love across the species barrier. And again, as far as we know, we haven't seen that in any other animal.
Interesting. Okay. What kind of dog do you have?
I have 3 dogs. So the one behind me is a golden retriever who's usually good, but has obviously decided not to be. And then in my house, I have a wirehead dachshund. And I have a Romanian shepherd dog, which we rescued from Romania recently. So I have 3 dogs.
Very nice. We have a mini golden doodle.
Oh, lovely.
Very cute, very cute. Okay, I think I have time for like 1 or 2 more questions, and I've been enjoying this very much, so thank you. Is it possible, based on the nature of what love is in your understanding, to fall out of it in the same way that you fall in? Does it reveal retroactively that it wasn't really love if it ends? Or is the nature of love to be a permanent state of affairs?
I think the need for love is a permanent state of affairs. So we crave love when we don't have it. We feel that visceral emptiness about that. But yes, you can fall out of love. Love isn't, whilst for example, we conceive of love as enduring for a lifetime, many loves don't endure for a lifetime. And people do separate, whether it be romantically, whether it be friendships, whatever it might be. And often that's because love is not just about neurochemistry. Love is also a psychological experience, a motivational experience, a social experience. There are reasons why people fall out of love. It might be that your family is just making it so hard for you that it becomes more and more stressful to be with this person. It might be that things about their personality start to annoy you, that psychologically you're not fitting together for whatever reason. And what tends to happen is you tend to start withdrawing from that person. And that, if you start withdrawing from that person, then the very basis of love, which is the neurochemistry, starts to diminish. And therefore, it's not that rewarding to be with that person anymore. In fact, you might get loads of cortisol in your brain, which is the stress hormone, which counteracts all the lovely love hormones. And actually, you start to find it a very stressful experience to be with that person, because we change, people change. And that very conscious psychological element of human love, where we reflect, we consider our relationships, we look about them, we philosophize about them, that starts to come into play. And I think, so yes, love can end, but it doesn't mean it was never there. It just means something has changed, which has meant that for whatever reason, you've maybe started to withdraw, and the biological basis of love starts to diminish. And I think that's so no, it doesn't mean it never existed. It just means that it does come to an end. And we know that we can't, humans have a limited number of people they can actually have close relationships with. And if you maintain those all our lives, we would never get new people in our life. And we would struggle, for example, when we started having children, where do they fit? in our, oh my gosh. So there is always a constant turnover, basically, of love. Some last a long, long time. Others are brief.
I'm sure you've come across situations like, parents who have difficult relationships with their children, or one of them, I've heard it said before, especially from children, like essentially something like this, like I hate my mother and I love my mother. Like there's somehow it remains like there was a primal enough connection that, and enough of an appreciation for something to continue, and at the same time they don't seem to appreciate their personalities at all, and don't want to be around them ever. I assume that's possible.
Completely possible, and that shows you the complexity of human love, is that there's this primal underpinning of it, which is driven a lot by neurochemistry, which is that constant attachment, particularly to people like our parents. But then on top of that, there's all this consciousness and psychology and personality and all these other factors that come in, where there might be a massive mismatch. So you don't like this person, you might actively hate this person, but at your core, that bit of probably neurobiological love remains. And that shows you how complicated human love is. It's not a switch that you turn on and off, because there are so many factors that feed into it. So certainly I think you can both love somebody at one level and really, really dislike them at another level quite easily.
Which is wild. It's a difficult way to be with somebody.
It is, but that shows the complexity, and that shows the difficulty of cooperating, of living with other people. And that's why we have love in the first place, because we need love to make sure we do live with other people.
Last question. Smack in the book of Leviticus, in the middle, it says, you should love your fellow as yourself. Again, it's a commandment. It's not optional. It's like, not if you feel like it, not if you think that they're funny, not if, not whatever. This is the goal. That would seem to presuppose that love is a choice, that you can make it happen if only you really wanted to. If you wanted to identify with the virtues of this person, you could cultivate this love if you had enough of a motivation. You think that's true? Or do you think that love is more just, it's a happening? It's some confluence of events and experiences that creates it? Or can I sit down and choose to love somebody if I want to?
Do you know what? I don't think ultimately you could love everybody, no. I think we have the power to overcome our biology to a certain extent, and maybe our visceral about somebody. I think we have the ability to do that. And we have the ability to reason about why we don't like somebody and try and learn to love them. I think we can do that. But I'm afraid, I think if the absolute basic instinct isn't there, I think that's a really, really hard thing to do. I think it's a really hard thing to do. So I think ultimately there maybe are a few people that it would be impossible to do, depending upon how, how that fits in with you. But I think it would be very tough.
Okay, understood. But would it be a worthy thing to do? Probably.
As long as it wasn't too detrimental to you. What I would say is we shouldn't embrace love always if it's really detrimental to you. I think you have to be a little bit careful. For sure.
No, in the healthiest version of this.
In the healthiest version, it would be a lovely idea, and it would be a good idea to try and love everyone, because basically those love hormones are much better for you than the stress hormones.
Right. Okay. Dr. Machin, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I'm going to just recommend your book, Why We Love. I really enjoyed this, and it's very insightful and deep and fun. And thank you for your work, and thank you for your time. And for the audience, please take a moment to like, subscribe, share, comment, and please join us again for the next installment of Beyond Belief. Thank you so much for being here.